Okay, everybody, welcome. Tonight we have a different kind of event that we have not had before. We have Tom Schaudel from Cool Fish, Tom Tom Club, Starfish,
Passion fish, rockfish.
Okay.
Trying to build a school.
Just wanted to give you a little bit of a background on Tom. After graduating from the Culinary Institute of America in 1963,
73.
sorry, 73, I meant to say
That
that.
would put me in my 70s.
He was over at Panama Hattie's, and now he has several restaurants of his own. He is currently putting together recipes for an upcoming cookbook.
Yes, yeah.
Sounds great. We'll be looking forward to that. So I'd like to welcome Tom.
Thank you.
And with Tom tonight, we have Adam Suprenant, I'm sorry, who is the winemaker at Osprey's Dominion. Adam has been a Long Island winemaker for about 7 years, starting out over in Christina in 1998 and then coming over to Osprey's in 2001. He has a master's in enology from UC Davis and a bachelor's in agriculture from Cornell. Started in the Long Island wine industry in 1986 when he was over at Villa Banfi's. So I'd like to welcome Adam. So I'm going to let you guys take over. Tonight we're doing a regional cuisine, pairing regional ingredients and New York State wines.
I'd like to welcome you all here and appreciate you coming out and having this class with us. When I was asked to do this, I was kind of excited because I'm a big fan of Long Island wines and Long Island foods. And you know, we try and get them involved in most of the restaurants. It's not always possible. We are seasonal here, and so the farm shut down. So when we talk about local foods, I'm talking about globally local, you know, more than regionally local. We try and use as much of the East End stuff as we can, but it limits us too much. So what I have here is I have, the first course is going to be a scallop course, which is a local fish, a diver scallop. And we're pairing it with a nage, and a nage is like a sauce made with diet cream, a little bit of shallot, and they do grow shallots on Long Island. And it's got some asparagus in it. There are asparagus on Long Island. It's actually made with a corn stock, and there's, you know, corn is like a local treasure out here in August. Morels, which come from locally from Oregon. And we have the second course, we're doing a duck and black bean chili, and duck is obviously from Long Island. But the third course is kind of interesting. We have cheeses from, they're regional, but they're regionally American. And we have a couple of cheeses from Wisconsin and some from Oregon. And on the last dish that you're going to have with the port, we have what they call an Oregonzola, which is a gorgonzola from Oregon. And I've paired it with carica. And carica is a very exotic fruit from Chile that's grown in the desert floor. It's like nothing you've ever had. It's like a cross between a mango and a pear. It's very cool. So we figured we'd throw that at you, and I think it'll go well with the port, and we'll have some fun. So I'll just give you some big background notes and thoughts on cuisine and restaurants. As Ginny was saying, I'm working on a cookbook right now. And it's basically a book of recipes, regional Long Island recipes, stuff I do in the restaurant. And I also write an article for a magazine called Great Restaurants of Long Island. It's called Tom's Top 10. I don't know if anybody's seen it, if you have or not. But it's basically my 10 worst customers of the year and what they did to get into the article. You can't even believe. Well, you know. So I have about 5 years of that under my belt. So there's 50 all-stars out there that we're actually going to give a lot of credit in the book. So if you want to hear any of those stories, feel free to ask. I know a little bit about food, a lot about kung fu, and a lot about guitar, so I'll take any questions on those three subjects. Anything else, I'm out on. I'm kind of shallow that way. So when we talk about Long Island, I think it's the next Napa Valley. I think that you know, you had this California cuisine thing happen in the 80s with Alice Waters and Jeremiah Town and all those guys, and it was very cool. And you know, Chino Ranch was involved. You always heard about Chino Ranch if you're out there. You're talking to Wolfgang Puck, who is like a friend of mine. And he used to, sorry, I have a cold, so he used to use these people at Chino Ranch, and he had all these beautiful vegetables brought back to the door. The same thing's going on the East End now in the North Fork. You have these little places like Sangley Farms and those guys out there, and they're growing wonderful stuff in the summer. Chefs like Michael Meehan, who's actually going to be here tomorrow, next Thursday? Yeah, who's a good friend of mine. In fact, I was drinking copious amounts of red wine with him yesterday. Surprised we remembered to come. But anyway, he's opening a restaurant in a vineyard out there, and it's the first for the North Fork, because they've been somewhat regulated out of doing that. But there's a couple of loophole properties out there that have commercial space. And so he's going to be opening the first North Fork restaurant that's supported by North Fork farmers with North Fork fish, and it's, you know, he's got a talent level that's amazing, and it's going to be a great place. So I think that we're heading in that direction. I think in 10 years, you know, the foods of Long Island, it's almost going to be like a regional cuisine, much like California and Florida have now. The wines, as you'll see tonight, are starting to speak for themselves. 20, 25 years ago when Louisa and Alex first came out there, I guess it was 25, 30 years ago now?
30.
Is it 30? Yeah. I was 12 at the time. But anyway, they opened up this thing, and the wines were a little harsh. They were young, and it was a burgeoning, you know, weekend gentleman farmer, smoke pot hippie thing out there. And then what happened was they started to hire people like Adam, who had you know, credentials and college education, and you know, everybody was like this initially, you know, don't look at what I'm doing, don't look at what I'm doing. And then they finally started to share. They started hiring talent. It became a communal effort to improve the wine. And I think the wines on Long Island will stand up to anything anywhere in the world at the price range. Obviously, you have, you know, big Pinot Noirs out there that, you know, are fabulous in France and California. But for the most part, if you take, you know, the same price range Chardonnays and Cabs, and especially my favorite is Cab Franc out there. I think that's the best grape out there. But they stand up to anything, and I think these guys are doing a great, great job. We try and pair a lot of the wines with the, you know, the local foods that we do in the summer. And I think that a lot of it is great, and it's a lot of fun. But not being you know, I'm not saying not being a winemaker, but not being, let's say being a chef, I think the whole flavor thing is much more important than the white with fish and red with meat and what do you drink and does it have tar and tobacco and cherry notes? Is there leather in that? Is it Bosch pear or Anjou pear? You know, you can get wrapped up in all of that stuff and forget about drinking the wine, because the wine's really what we're doing, you know, the drinking for. And a lot of times, you know, I know in my end of the business, for a long time it was a very snobby sport. You had a lot of, you know, French people, and you know how they are about that wine thing. But I think once the Americans got a hold of it, they really kind of brought it down to, I know in the restaurant, when I do descriptions on my wine list, you know, I won't use, you know, the Robert Parker review adjectives. I'll use like, you know, laser beam juice with knee melting finish and holy shit, you should have had that. I can't believe how good that is. And it works, and people relate to that. And so my whole point is like, don't forget to enjoy the wine. Don't, you know, try and crunch it so hard that, and it's the same thing with food. Don't try and figure it out to the point where you forget to enjoy it, because it's a lot of fun. Any questions so far? I must have covered everything. The wines you have in front of you, you have a Fumé Blanc, which is Sauvignon Blanc, and you have Chardonnay. And what I did today is I paired these with, I paired that with a diver scallop. And the diver scallop's made with a nage, which is a sauce made with shallots and morel spring peas, which are just coming into season now, and asparagus. The reds, the first two reds we're going to pair with, I made a smoked duck chili with black beans and a lot of herbs, and actually there's some chocolate in there also, which should kind of complement the red wines. The last red wine, what we decided to do, I have a very talented cheese purveyor here. Al, he's in the back, he's going to talk to you a little bit too. We're going to pair three American cheeses with the last red wine from weakest to strongest, and see how they pair with the food, see how they pair with the wine. And then the last one we have the Gorgonzola. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire these things up. If you guys want to maybe just, you know, try a little bit of the white wines and then see how you like them. If there's any questions, maybe you could, you know, take the floor a little bit, because I have to do some cooking here. All right, great, thanks.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I was supposed to mention at the beginning of the session that the Camembert cheese that's listed on your cheese sheet was not able to.
That's spaced on the top.
That's
Thanks, Tom. You know that you're a hard act to follow. A little bit about wine and food pairing from my perspective. First of all, I totally agree with Tom that the rules don't necessarily apply, the hard and fast rules, and they may not apply to you in particular. So if you want to drink Chardonnay with your filet mignon, you know what? America's a free country, and we have the right to do as we please. I will just maybe briefly go in and lightly go into some of the scientific basis of how wine and food pairs. When I got my master's degree, my specialty was, and my field of study was the sensory evaluation of wine, and so, which is a whole category. It's actually they do very similar things when they evaluate, say, different recipes for major food companies. It's a very technical view of wine, and I cannot agree with Tom more that it doesn't matter necessarily if you get raspberry or boysenberry or black cherry or black currant. You really need to focus in on the big picture of the wine and what is it doing for you. Does it fill up your mouth? Do the flavors jump out on your tongue? Do they last a long time? When you put the glass down, do you immediately want another sip? Or are you like, this wine is sort of okay? So I would say there are a few things, a few maybe no-nos, but they're not absolute no-nos. One is is to try to avoid vinegar salad dressings at the start of a meal. This is because vinegar, which its main constituent is acetic acid, often will make a wine seem flat and just out of balance. And then subsequent wines may not taste the way they normally would if you hadn't initially started with that salad as a first course. So if there's anything really I could tell you, maybe not to hold off with or have your salad at the end of the meal, that's one thing I would recommend. I think if you notice that Tom's first course, the scallop, and I will call it a cream sauce, but we will call it a nage, is, since cream is out of fashion, I suppose.
It's way out. Only the Diet Cream.
Is an example of something where you want to pair it with a richer white wine. So in general, the leaner the food, the leaner the wine. Now, what you should be looking for is, and it's something, why do wines taste better with food? There are some wines where you can sit on your patio and sip them all day, and you are perfectly satisfied and you can hang out and have a few glasses. There are other wines that don't necessarily taste great where you'd want to, drink a few glasses, but once you have some food in front of you, they really open up and develop. And part of that is the interaction of the stuff you are eating, namely fat and protein and sugar, and the way that they interact with the wine. Now, if you eat if you eat more of a lean, say, meat, like pork or chicken, those generally those would take a lighter red wine. So say like this Pinot Noir, for example, to me would go very well with poultry and pork dishes and things that do not have a lot of fat. Now when you have, say, a nice piece of ham that has a good fat content in the meat, that fat will actually lubricate your mouth and also interact with the tannins of the wine. And so so the fat in the sauce or the fat in the main course, the meat, that will make the wines seem fuller bodied and smoother with a less bitter aftertaste. And now, when you want, and then one of the other things that is nice when you have a meal, a dish like this with a nice light, very light, ethereally light cream sauce.
So it's almost transparent.
It's transparent.
It's like a suggestion of cream sauce.
Exactly.
Yes.
Is that you want a wine with some acidity, because that acidity is going to clean through your palate and prepare your palate for the next bite or the next sip of wine. So, and then, I often have this problem sometimes, and it's not serious, I don't worry. But when I drink some Chardonnays, they're so heavy and they just stick to my mouth. And oftentimes when I drink a Chardonnay of that style, and usually they have a little residual sugar in them, I often find myself at the dinner table reaching for the glass of water to clear out my palate, because the Chardonnay just sticks to the back of my tongue, and I kind of get like where you're trying to refresh your palate. So wine is supposed to be a refreshing beverage, and part of what makes wine refreshing is that acidity will finish the wine through and leave you ready for the next sip. So the two wines that you're tasting tonight, one is a Fumé Blanc.
Need any more?
And Fumé Blanc is a Sauvignon Blanc, which is barrel fermented in oak. This wine has the purpose of this wine. Well, I would say the overriding effect of this wine, I think, it's just a big, creamy Sauvignon Blanc, quite different than what you would normally associate with Sauvignon Blanc, where the oak is present, but it's not a major player. It's there, and you can taste some oak. But this is a fat, creamy wine that really, I think, should be a knockout with this dish. These grapes were specially handpicked at the latest possible date at the end of our harvest. So we did another picking where we made a stainless steel version of the wine, which is crisper and leaner, and probably would be overmatched by this dish because it's too lean. But as Sauvignon Blanc ripens, you go from herbaceous citrus characters in the fruit to a more tropical nature of the fruit. More mango, banana, a little coconut, and I'm sorry to use those.
No, that's fine. I like those.
And also the acidity drops as the fruit ripens. So that really softens up the wine. And this wine was also aged on lees, as was the Chardonnay. And that when you age it on lees, and you're probably wondering what are lees. Lees are essentially the remains of the yeast after they're done fermenting. So when they ferment all the sugar to alcohol, there's nothing left for them to live on, so consequently they pass on. And then when they do, they fall to the bottom. And I actually will stir the barrels, because when those yeast start to break down in the wine, they'll release what are known as fatty acids, some more chemistry. And those fatty acids will give the wine body and also the yeast. Actually, I don't know if there are any Marmite fans out there, but yeast has a very particular aroma, and it's actually, you would call it yeasty, but it's this yeast aroma that adds some complexity to this wine. So just for another second, I'll talk about the Chardonnay. The Chardonnay is also 100% barrel fermented. Both of these wines are dry, by the way, but because of the lees contact and barrel aging, they have a presence and a body which would suggest that they might be slightly sweet. But I guarantee you that these are absolutely dry. And these are and the Chardonnay is 100% barrel fermented, also with the lees stirred. But the oak is the new oak, which is where that smoky, toasty vanilla comes from. That is in a higher percentage in this wine. So, any questions? I know I threw a lot at you guys.
Are these both Osprey wines?
These are both Ospreys. These are both 2001 vintage. And these are both examples of wines that are mature. So this is what, most of us consume wines probably too early. In fact, incredibly too early a lot of times.
Amen.
And so these are two wines that are currently available, that are current releases, that have developed some secondary attributes from just bottle aging and having the wines improve in the bottle. And actually, wine is one of the few foods that actually gets better with time. Because a lot of these beer companies, they put dates on their bottles not because they're bragging about the vintage of their beer.
Yeah, I have a friend who can actually read the barcodes.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, he knows the barcodes.
I always thought that whites they can't sit as long as a red, though. Is that true,
That's generally true, with exceptions. Okay, there are great white wines that will last 8 to 10 years, but generally speaking, 3 to 5 years would be peak, I would say, for most wines, and then it's just a matter of how fast they decline after that. And part of the reason is the same reason why red wine is red and white wine is white. Red wine has tannins. Okay, and tannins, just to give you a kind of a layperson's perspective, tannins are what come if there are any tea drinkers here, and anybody who's left the tea bag in their water too long notices there's a bitter drying sensation from the tea. Now that's caused by tannins. And tannins are natural components of a lot of foods, including chocolate, tea, coffee, wine, and they're actually known to be preservatives, and that's actually the word comes from tanning leather. They used to use plant material to actually tan leather back in the day before chemistry made us bigger, badder, and better.
Right.
Okay? So red wine has tannin, and that actually helps the wine age. wine was made in barrel. So, you know, if you just more acidic, and more like, you know, a wine that would go with something quite a bit less rich than this dish, I would think. Wouldn't you, Tom?
I think what happens for me when I studied Kung Fu for 20 years, and so the whole gig is yin yang. And for me, it's pretty much the same with food. If I have a scallop dish like this, is pretty rich. Scallops are rich by nature, high in cholesterol, whatever. Same thing with cream. I wouldn't order a Chardonnay with this personally because you have a big rich wine with a big rich dinner. And you get this competing thing, you know, like I'm better than you, know I'm tougher than you know, you don't want that going on. So what I always do is, if I have a real rich dish, I'll order something a little bit sharper and leaner to kind of cut through the butteriness of that, to get that balance in the mouth. And I think Sauvignon Blanc is a great way to go. I think that better made Pinot Grigios, not Santa Margarita or anything sourced in boxes, is a good way to go. I think Grüne Veltliner, which is an Austrian grape, which is a fabulous food wine. Chardonnay to me I don't think it's such a great food wine. I mean, when Chardonnays are made well, they're fabulous and they deserve all of that they get, but they're kind of, I think they should be just enjoyed on their own. I don't think they really match well with a lot of foods. It's the same with Cabernets. I don't really think Cabernets match well with a lot of foods. Fabulous wines, but I'd much rather have a Pinot, I'd much rather have a Grenache or a Syrah, or something that has a little more character and aromatics to it than just the wine itself. But my rule of thumb is, if you got a rich dish, you know, get kind of a leaner wine. If you have a leaner dish like Sole or something, you know, although Sauvignon Blanc would be a great pairing for that, as would Muscadet or any of those leaner wines, I think that sometimes if you have a more muscular wine, maybe you know, like a Tokai Friulano or something a little more aromatic, might be more complementary to the dish because it is so plain. So when I match wines for myself, that's generally the way I go. And I didn't mean to say that you shouldn't get into some of these adjectives that are fun, but I'm just going to give you an example of what happened to me. I have a friend of mine who has a wine store, and he used to be a teacher. He's got a great palate. He's been at it a long time, but he takes it so seriously that it's almost painful. And we were tasting in the city, and he comes up to me and he goes, "Did you taste that Peter Michael Chardonnay?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Was that Anjou or Bosch pear in that?" I'm like, you couldn't make this up. Then half an hour later, he's like completely trashed. You know, you need a code breaker to get his notes out, right? He's looking at the notes and he goes, "Did you get the rhubarb in the back of that Cabernet?" I'm not even sure I remember what rhubarb tastes like, you know? So, you know, you can take it to a point where it's silly, you know? But don't forget to have fun with the wine. If you like the wine, yeah, I'll give you another example. I used to own Panama Hattie's. That was my first restaurant. They built it in '83. And I got hooked up with Mike from Post Liquors. I don't know if you know Mike. He's Mike Douglas. Great guy, good palate. So we decided to do a blind tasting of California and French Chardonnays. So I think on the California side we had maybe a Chalon. We had a couple of big ones. A Chalon, I think we had a couple of ABCs, some single vineyard, Arrowwood or whatever it was, and then a couple of lighter ones. And from France we had a Polini, we had a couple of Meursaults, we had a Chevalier, we had Macans, and we had Fruissets. Blind tasting, this is all wine geeks. How much you had? He says 3 cases. So I said, all right. So I took it, I put it on by the glass, and I believe in passing the savings on to the owner. So we were selling it for $9 a glass, and it flew. It flew out the window, you know? And every once in a while, you get one of those, you know? Not often, but you get one of those, you know? That's my Lilco, you know, like counterbalance to Lilco. That's what happens. But yeah, it's you know, wine's it's a fun sport, and it's out there to be drunk and talked about and shared and to have fun with. It's it shouldn't be so serious where you start getting headaches over descriptions. Well, let me ask you a question. Show of hands. How many people like the pairing with the Sauvignon Blanc? Okay, and how many with the Chardonnay? Okay.
Rah, Chard.
Well, you know what's good about the great part about wine, it's like music. Nobody's wrong, you know? You know, if you happen to like Celine Dion, leave the room. That's fine, you know? But I'm a Steve Vai guy, you know, so it's hard to listen to her, you know? But it's true. Nobody's right or wrong, and it's just a fun sport. And I think it's interesting the way that the flavors play off, you know, both dishes, and they change. You know, they change with the different wines. It's great. Do you want to?
And I would just add in the defense of Chardonnay. I completely agree that it often is not a great food wine, and a lot of the problem comes when they're lower in acid and have
Yeah, flat.
a little sugar in them, and so that just the wine just melts off your tongue, and you don't get refreshed. And and what I was like saying about Chardonnay is after you have this dish with a real heavy, slightly sweet Chardonnay, that it just, you're not refreshed, and there's your palate is not doesn't get clean through, and so you just are just left there going, well, I don't want more of my food and I don't want more of my wine. Give me the water glass. I need to
Pass me a lemon.
I
Yeah,
need to
right.
get this through my
Totally.
my tongue, you know.
Yeah.
And so, but I think the Chardonnays that do go well with food are, you know, a leaner style
Steel
with some
fermented.
acidity.
Steel.
And I think that even this Chardonnay, even though it's barrel fermented with a secondary fermentation, which lowers the acidity, this Chardonnay I think has enough acidity as a backbone where it gets you over the hump and you're really ready. It cleans through the very light cream, the very
Suggestion of cream, the suggestion of cream.
microfilm of cream
Yes, that's
on
it.
your tongue,
Now you're getting warm.
and then you are therefore you get you're ready for the next bite of food or the next
Cool.
sip of wine.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is probably for the winemaker.
Sure.
Okay.
I read in Wine for Dummies where barrel fermented Chardonnays are actually less oaky than barrel aged Chardonnays, and they didn't say why, but they said it's like a misconception, like, you know, where you think like when barrel fermented it's going to be like really oaky.
That's the dummy part.
I would say, well, I would say by and large, I mean, I have had experience with both. What you get with barrel fermented Chardonnay is the exposure to the breakdown of the yeast. And that can often take out, you know, yeast or proteins, things, sorry, more chemistry here. I don't mean to do this, but yeast are basically, their cell walls are proteins, and they can take some of that flavor out with them, and you generally separate the wine off the yeast. Now, a wine that's been fermented in a tank and transferred to the barrel generally doesn't have a lot of yeast, and so you may pick up some more oak aroma, although I wouldn't use it as an absolute hard and fast rule, and I would kind of say that book may be a little bit misleading on that particular point. But the point, I would say the overarching point is that oak flavor, that smoky, toasty vanilla from oak is like salt in cooking. And once you go too far, you cannot take it out of the wine. Okay? So what I strive to do is to really, and what I strive for my winemaking is to make oak a role player, not the major actor on the stage. And I like, you know, and I select out different barrel makers that really elevate the fruit and put the oak aroma and flavor in the background, so it's complexity and not so you have to start up the tongue chainsaw and saw through the wood before you can get to the wine. And I think, you know, that's really, you know, I think that's really, and in the same way where Tom wouldn't put, I mean, he used morel, but he could put in truffle oil on that dish.
Gilding the lily.
And that could be, I mean, that's like morels plus truffle oil, and that would just make the dish
Mushrooms.
incredibly mushroomy.
Yeah, it'd be mushrooms.
You know, and that may work with some ideas, but you'd lose the whole delicacy of the scallops, which are very clean and just really have more of a mouth presence, to me, scallops do, than an actual like fish flavor.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I think when you're talking about, you know, the thought process behind food and the mind of a chef or whatever we're talking about here, I'm almost afraid to tell you what's in here, but you know, I have a chemistry background too. I was a guitar player in the middle '60s, so But anyway, think I'm kidding? What we're striving to do when we think about a dish is we're striving for some kind.
Not pharmaceutical.
Absolutely, everything was organic back then. Pesticide. We're always worried about pesticides, right? You're snorting heroin. You're saying, "Geez, I hope it's pure." You know. Anyway, I think that what we're trying to do is we're trying to balance the dish and trying to make it make sense. And food has gotten much better and more interesting in the last 20 years. But there's a silliness involved in some of it. I have a friend of mine who's he works in a country club where it's safe and you don't have to sell any of this stuff. So he's always, he went to Ebuli. I don't know if you're familiar with Ebuli in Spain, but they have this mad scientist chef over there, Ferdinand Adria. And he was the first one that started all the foam stuff, you know, and the chef started playing with foams. And it was like, I kind of avoided it because it wasn't really food. It was kind of like plastic, you know. And I don't know when the last time you had a real hankering for razor clams with Parmesan foam, but, you know, it never really got me that, you know. So he comes out the other night. I went to a friend's, had a party there, and he comes out. He goes, "Did you taste the sweetbreads? I baked them in hay." Why would you do that? You know? Yeah, I mean. So what some people are doing is they're looking for the missing note, you know, and they're looking in all the other wrong directions. I think it's really focus on the dish. You know, it doesn't have to be baked in hay. It doesn't need foam on it. It doesn't. You know, there's a restaurant that I went to in the village. I'm trying to think of the name of it. The chef was a guy, Paul Liebrandt, used to be at Atlas. And you had to sit down, they would tie your hands behind your back, blindfold you, and they'd spray orange essence around your head. They'd come out and hit you in the face with a rosemary sprig, you know. Oh, I'm not kidding. Oh, yeah. It was bizarre. And what happens is now you have waiters saying, you know, to come over with an appetizer and say, you know, you have to eat this all in one, you know, take it right down because there's the balance between the hot and cold, man, is like really, if one more waiter tells me how to eat him, we'll smack him in the head with a pepper mill, you know. I just want to have dinner, you know what I mean? It's really about the food. It's not about all that other stuff. So if you cook at home, think balance. If you cook at home, think fresh. If you cook at home, try and think Long Island in season because it's great. Other than that, it's really not as hard as most people make it out to be. It just, there's a couple of techniques you need to know, and we think about it in maybe a slightly different way. You know, I always tell people I turned 2 bad habits into a career, so I got a pretty good life, you know, and it's eating and drinking thing, you know, it's a lot of fun. And so are there any questions of me so far? Does anybody have any questions at all? Yes?
Where can you find fresh morel here?
I would try Fairway. Yeah, I would try Fairway. That's probably the best place to go, I would think. We have, you know, I have buyers in the market that bring them to us, but I think that they carry a lot of stuff. I would guess this time of year they would have them.
Morel?
Yeah, I would think so.
Fresh.
Oh yeah, I would think so. Yeah, they're pretty good. They got a lot of stuff. Any other questions? Want to hear one of my horror stories?
Yes.
All right. Everybody knows what martinis are? Martini is the express train to where you want to go. It's not the local, there's no stops. You get on and you get off, it's over, you know. So I get a party of 5 come in to Coolfish. I have mom, dad, son about 12, daughter about 9, and grandma. Grandma says, I'll have a martini. All right. Waitress brings grandma a martini. She slams the first one down like the Taliban are walking up 135, you know. Like, boom, like this. I'll have another. Okay. Waitress brings her another one. I didn't see her go down. I just got the message back to the kitchen. There's a problem on 27. From what I heard, Grandma took the second martini and never came back off the chair. Just went right back, and she was out before she hit the ground, right? So I get out there, and I'm like, oh, call the paramedics. Get these people here, you know. So Grandma's on the ground, right? Everybody's like running around. You know, nobody knows what to do. So I said, is she medicated? She goes, no. I said, she been drinking? Yeah. Well, what'd she have? She had 2 martinis. When? Like in the last 5 minutes. I think there's something the matter with my mother. I'd say that's accurate, you know. I think there's something wrong too. But, you know, is there a contest I'm unaware of? I mean, what's the hurry, you know? P.S. The EMTs arrive, you know, so they get grandma on oxygen, they bring her up, and she's sitting in a thing, and, you know, they finally get her back to where she's speaking, and she's going to be okay. Everybody breaks into Dr. Phil at the table. Mom, you shouldn't do this in front of the kids. I can't believe it. You know, Grandma, I'm glad you're okay, the whole thing, you know. She looks at everybody, and she goes, you know, I was just a little tired, right? Can everybody just get off my back, right? So now I lose it laughing, right? I'm in the back. So the waitress comes running into me. She goes, did you believe that woman out there? She said she was tired. I said, do you know what just happened? I've been in the restaurant business since 1968. This is the first time I've ever seen anybody get hammered, pass out, get awake, and resuscitated, and ace an intervention, all in 20 minutes. It was the most insane thing I ever saw in my life. And she walked out like nothing happened. So, yeah, bizarre. Give you another quick one while I'm dishing out here. I had a woman come into Cool Fish about 2 weeks ago, I would say in her 70s. So there's a problem in the dining room, and she's screaming in the dining room, "They took my bread plate! They took my bread plate! They took my bread plate!" I'm like, this is like Rain Man with no math skills. So I go out there, I said, "What's the problem?" She goes, "They took my bread." I got the bread plate bought, about 10 minutes ago. "What's the problem?" "My teeth were on it." She took her, now you would think she would need those, right? She takes the teeth out, puts them on a bread plate. Busboys, they're like robots, take the thing. So now I'm in the garbage can, trying to, find a, there they are at the bottom of the garbage can. Whole set of uppers. So now you got to bring them back out. So we wash them off, we put them in the dishwasher, the whole thing. How do you garnish them? Parsley? Get stuck, right? So we went with mint. Yeah. I can't imagine. Yeah, it's an Echo Lab. All right, I'm gonna toss this out to you here. So if I could get Al up here again, and David maybe can give me a hand.
This is a very unique glass. Is there a particular reason why?
Oh yeah.
Is this considered a
Yeah,
tasting?
why don't we, let's talk about glassware, and, normally people,
Oh
when
yeah,
they drink
right there.
wine, they generally have it in a very open glass.
Cool.
This is kind of a high-tech glass. To me personally, I think it's a little awkward with the two finger holes. I really like stemware. But this is really, this is like a trend. But I really want to talk about shape of the glass, which is really the most important. So when you, a lot of times, when you serve Chardonnay, you serve it in narrower glass, and when you serve red wine, you serve it in kind of a balloon glass. Now, what happens is when you have a big wide bowl like that, a lot of times the aromas don't focus, and so you can lose some of the aroma fun in a big glass. They'll just get lost. Now, if you see these glasses, what they've done
Just a little
is
chat.
they've tapered the top of the glass up there, and that's really to focus the aroma. So when you swirl the glass, okay, that swirling deposits a thin film of wine around the glass,
It's sprinkled.
and then the aroma compounds evaporate from the wine from that thin film at a higher rate. So when you swirl the wine, you get more aroma into the glass, and when you have a tapered opening, those aromas focus. And so, so in that regard, the shape of the glass is right. And when if you're considering at home buying some new stemware, I would avoid the big bowls or the kind of, it's hard to say, it would be like cutting that glass down the middle, where it's just kind of just open like this, more of a goblet. And I would try to get one that has a fatter base and then becomes tapered up to the top. And this is for aroma, and I will tell you that 95% of the consumers of wine do not do this, they do this. They bypass the nose. And actually, from a technical standpoint, what you taste in terms of the fruity aromas, the herbaceous aromas, some of the other aromas, you're actually smelling the wine in your mouth. Okay? And if you've ever seen people slush or swirl or make silly gargling noises with the wine, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get more of the aromas of the wine into the air in their mouth so their nose can smell the wine. So if you want to just double check to see you're right, see if I'm right, what you can actually do, and it's a little awkward, you can hold your nose and then taste the wine, and I guarantee you will not be able to taste the fruit of the wine, because, and you have to hold it while, it's really kind of awkward, but you have to hold it for a while. But essentially, Your tongue is only able to taste 5 basic flavors, and there's also a sensory, there's also a physical flavor or sensation that you get. And so the 5 ones are sweet, sour, salt, bitter, and then what did I miss there?
Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and I always forget the last one.
Well, there's one where like MSG, that supposedly is another, you know, monosodium glutamate. And then your tongue has a tactile capability, so you can taste actually the viscosity, you know, you can sense the viscosity, whether something is sweet, whether something is not sweet. You actually,
I'm a parsley
that has
specialist.
body, and you're paying attention to the actual, and this is really where it gets really technical. Tom, I'm sure you'll love this.
I'm ready,
part.
I'm ready.
Paying attention
I'm
to
paying
the
attention, I'm ready.
for you after, you know,
I'm ready.
and the fact that you lost brain cells in the 70s like me
Oh, yeah.
does not excuse you.
I think they're overrated. I think brain cells are overrated.
But actually, there's a there are proteins in your gums and mouth, and actually red wines, the tannins in those red wines will bind with the proteins and give you a drying kind of you know, a very drying sensation on the gums. It's because the water is actually getting sucked out of your gums. And so that is why, and then you also lose the lubrication in your mouth. And so when you have a heavy red wine by itself, your gums will just kind of, I mean, they won't dry out like turn into a brown plant and fall off, but you'll actually lose the moisture around your gums, and so you will, and there will be the slipperiness that exists in your mouth will disappear, and you can sense that, and then that's what makes, and then the duration of that makes that wine hard to drink. So those big tannic wines that are young, those are very hard just to drink on their own because they're very hard on the mouth, similar with very acidic wines.
That may explain the woman with the teeth.
Yeah, that may be.
She might have just lost them with a big tannic red, yeah.
Infusion there.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, there's another good story, and there may be a scientific explanation for Grandma passing out on her offer, and I'll get into that in a minute. It's a pretty cool explanation.
It's called too much vodka.
No, there's actually a physiological explanation. But anyway, and that's why food helps lubricate and also has proteins which bind with the tannins in the wine. So instead of your gums just getting pulverized, the food actually takes some of that on and makes that wine seem fatter and broader. And also, so getting to Tom's story about why certain women can be very cheap dates, okay?
Grandma was cheap.
There is a physiological difference between a man and a woman, besides the obvious. Women actually have what's called a higher first-pass metabolism, okay? And that technical jargon means that women absorb alcohol at a faster rate through their actual tissues in their mouth, their esophagus, and their stomach. Okay, so that's whereas men, for some reason, absorb at a much slower rate. So the effects of inebriation will be felt on a female generally faster than they will on a male, because males have to wait till it gets past the stomach to actually absorb the bulk of the alcohol.
I think males need everything 3 times,
Unless
you know.
IV.
No, I mean, it takes longer. It's like, did you ever notice when you go to like New Orleans, right? It says girls, 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 XXX. How many times you said take out the garbage, take out the garbage, you know? And then finally, oh yeah, I got it. The 3rd time we get it. It's probably the same with alcohol.
And what's 3 and 4?
Okay, 3 is a Lakewood Estate Pinot Noir. I'm not especially familiar with the actual property, but I do understand it is from upstate New York. And for those of you who have seen the movie
Merci.
Sideways, anybody see
great,
Sideways
thanks.
here?
I'm
Sideways?
but I didn't see it.
Well,
great.
Pinot Noir is now the in wine
But this tastes very
for
light.
everybody.
To me, this is
And
light
Merlot,
lighter than a normal.
it's generally, Pinot Noir has
This,
less
but
tannins.
this tastes lighter than,
Generally Pinot Noir?
yeah, to me it does.
Doesn't have as- I don't-
Unless maybe it's because of the combination of the foods, but to me it
could
tastes
be.
lighter.
Is there heat in the chili?
Little heat.
Little heat. So that's
that
another
might
thing that
change
can be
the-
distracting with wine is
Yeah, it
when
might
you
change
put a
the
little
flavor.
spice in, and when you put a little spice in wine, alcohol, actually, when you eat hot, very spicy food, the worst thing you can do is drink a beer because the alcohol in the beer actually makes the hot hotter.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I found that out.
Well, you drink till you don't care anymore. Yeah. So, yeah.
But anyway, Pinot Noir in general makes a more elegant wine, less tannins, less full body. This one, I happen to think, just to give you my impression, I think the nose is very pretty. It's perfumey. It's opens up the mind to some nice expectations. From smelling the wine, and it smells beautiful. And this is typical of Pinot Noir.
It just could be because I had the beans. No, really. But I didn't taste it
And
before.
by the mouth, I will say that this is quite exceptional Pinot Noir.
This
I
is
really
probably the best.
think that it's the balance is just right there. To me, I mean, this is also very kung fu. I watched a lot of Saturday kung fu films. Does that qualify?
I'll kill you and
Yes,
2,000 of your strongest warriors, you know.
So,
great.
anyway, there's a balance and there's a harmony.
So it's-
I think
Actually, I prefer to.
it's very ripe Pinot Noir, and to me, I really think this is showing quite nicely. I mean, it's
I agree.
really yummy.
Yeah, but I
You know.
prefer to compound.
This is why
The
we,
thing about this wine, which can be a little distracting, is that a lot of producers on the West Coast tend to go for body in Pinot, and generally those wines tend to be higher in alcohol, and I think that, especially for Pinot Noir, takes away from the elegance, and it shouldn't, you can't make a chimpanzee into a 500-pound gorilla, and you should, so sometimes you shouldn't try. And this is really a nice, understated, very well put together Pinot Noir.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
It's tasting different because of the hotness of the food.
Yeah. Well, that's why we wanted you to taste it with two wines. We wanted to see the comparison and how they would. Yeah, that's some. And red wines. I think of red wines like I think of them. They have those relationship exercises you do to try and keep things in mind and remember. And I always think of red wines like women. And Pinot Noir is much more Elle Macpherson, elegant, tall, slender. Beautiful, where like Cabernet is more Pam Anderson, kind of out front, or Shiraz and stuff like that, That's the way, it's easier for me to think. I'm not even being flip here, I just really think about it that way. Same thing with some whites, you have these elegant French Chardonnays, and then you have these buttery, sugared, Kendall Jackson-esque, Chardonnays out of California, which have really given the grape a bad name, I think, over the, long haul, the residual sugar and all of that stuff.
People are, this is one of those things where wine critics, for all their hubris, got locked into a particular style of wine where they started giving big scores to the really oaky, buttery, flat kind of, very creamy Chardonnay. And so then all the producers naturally, because when you get the big scores on your wine, you generally have an easier time selling.
True.
So producers started to follow suit, and then all of a sudden everybody started making that style, and now the wine critics are howling
Yeah, too flabby.
against the big buttery oaky Chardonnays and wondering why can't we make
Yeah.
more lean,
Elegant, lean.
drinkable, food-friendly Chardonnay.
Yeah.
So you're sometimes you're damned if you do or damned if you don't with the critics.
And what was number 4?
Up front.
Number 4 is a meritage wine, and so that would be a blend of the major Bordeaux varieties, which include Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot.
Is it more Franc?
It is no Franc. It's actually...
It smelled even like.
Really? Meritage is actually a made-up name, and it was made up by actually a restaurant guy, from what I understand.
I heard that also.
Yeah. And anyway, what happens is in this country, if you want to make a wine and call it Merlot, it needs to be 75% Merlot to be able to call it Merlot. Now, in certain circles, people didn't want to, this is a free country, we're free spirits, and so we didn't want to be tied down by a regulation forcing you to have 75%. But then we're also capitalists, so we're like, well, what do we call this thing and how do we market it? So they had a contest, and somebody came up with Meritage, and actually you only need to have 2 varieties, and actually you could make a Meritage 95% one variety and only have 5% of one other.
That's funny.
So you could make a Meritage that you could call a Merlot or a Cabernet Sauvignon. So, which to me, I scratched my head on that one. But basically, what you're supposed to do is make the best wine of the vintage without regard to blending requirements. So this wine happens to be 55% Merlot and 45% Cabernet Sauvignon from a vintage where the 2000 vintage, which was an exceptional vintage for Long Island, for the reds, especially for the reds. And the reason being is that Cabernet Sauvignon got very, very ripe, and you'll taste that example in wine number 5, which is our reserve Cabernet Sauvignon. But when Cabernet Sauvignon is the last red variety in the Meritage family to ripen, with the exception of possibly Petit Verdot, which is a little bit later. But Long Island typically gets Merlot ripe most of the time, but Cabernet Sauvignon some of the time. So ironically, we will add Merlot to Cabernet Sauvignon to give it body. Whereas give it body, and because the tannins are riper and it blends a better wine. Whereas in most of the other parts of the world, Merlot is used to soften Cabernet Sauvignon or make the blend a little fuller and flesh it out. So this wine is, to me, is maybe a 2 or a 3 year out of 10 possibility, where we can just get Cabernet really, really nice and ripe, and where the ensuing blend is a really nice, full-bodied, ageable red wine that has complexity, and we don't always get that in the reds every vintage. Would that be your assessment, Tom?
Totally, yeah. That's why they have the grand vintage wines.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Can I ask the chef a question?
Sure.
Of course.
Could you tell us a little bit about this duck and black bean? Did you have any wine in it? What are the sauces you added to it?
Gotta wait for the book to come out. Have to wait for the book to come out. No, what? No.
It was they were both excellent.
They're both excellent. I just wanted to.
Thank you. The chili I took.
You selling books already, Tom?
Yeah, pretty soon, yeah. Gotta, chef's got to make a living, man. 2 hours at 185, smoked bean mesquite and a little bit of applewood, and then I add that when the chili's done. The chili process, it's easy. It's like onions and garlic and some red and yellow peppers. I throw that down. I put a little bit of roux in there, chili powder, chipotles, things like that, and then some duck stock, and bring it back up with tomato paste, and that's it. It's pretty much easy. And I do finish my chilies with chocolate, because the sweetened chocolate counteracts some of the This is the chemistry part. Some of the heat in the chilies. You know, so I want the flavor of the chipotles, but I don't want you to, you know, it's not one of those. It's not supposed to be one of those.
Now, when you say chocolate, like, you
The
put
dark
dark chocolate?
I would
I use 2/3 bittersweet and 1/3 sweetened.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, you know, it's like a mole thing, you know. I mean, chocolate is, you know, rife in Mexican cuisine, and you know, I tend to think of chili that way. So, a long time ago, you know, it started off almost as an accident, believe it or not. I have a chocolate fetish. I mean, I eat about 6 pounds a day, and I was, you know, I have one of those ridiculous, you know, those Hershey's Big Bars, you know, like you know, like $1 or whatever. So I'm like snapping it. It was like almost like Seinfeld thing with the, you know, the Tic Tac went in the guy's, you know, operation. And I'm like, oh, gee, you know what, that could work, you know. And so we started playing with the chocolate thing in the kitchen. It came out pretty good, so we stayed with it, you know.
And I would say that duck is one of those chameleon foods. I mean, you can have it with a really big, rich red wine,
Oh, yeah,
and you
yeah.
can also have it
So good.
with the Pinot Noir. So
Yeah.
that, you know, that to me, I mean, I don't know about this particular. You know, I think this was maybe
It's heavy for Pinot.
a little overwhelming for the Pinot Noir. Did everybody, did other people agree with that?
How many liked it better with the Pinot? And with the other, the Meritage?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. That's the Osprey Dominion.
I have a question about blending.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you see many blends, Cab Merlot, or Cab Shiraz. What decides the percentage of what you're going to blend of one with the other? Do you make the wines up separately and say, I don't like this and I like this, so therefore I'll blend it in those proportions?
Yeah,
Essentially,
pretty much.
that would be the distillation of that. I mean, that it is, but the real fact is, the reality on the ground is, Osprey's Dominion has 3 different vineyard sites, and we have the same variety planted on at least 2 or all 3 of those vineyard sites, and those sites have different soils. They have different kinds of. There's different kinds of Merlot. There's not all one homogeneous Merlot. There are different types of Merlot that have been selected out of different fields or have been, you know. So anyway, on a certain year, I will have a block. Well, like I started to explain before, certain years, Cabernet Sauvignon gets ripe. So you'd want to include more of that into your blend because it's ripe, it's going to add structure, and it's going to add an interesting fruit component. Other years, maybe it's only Cabernet Franc and Merlot that get super ripe. And so then your blends would tend to focus more on those 2 varieties, especially in the Meritage.
Now, you say it gets super ripe, but is that based on tasting what you've made and then saying,
I can tell you that when I make a tank of red wine, when those tanks are really excellent, I can tell you within a day or 2 before the wine's even finished, the primary fermentation.
This is
whether
facing
that's
them.
gonna be a good
Yes,
tank.
this,
Right.
And also, I'm out in the vineyard tasting the grapes as the, as
This
the,
cheese in the wide one
faces
the person, right? David, this cheese has to face the person, okay? The one in the big one.
And that can also be
No,
an
I'm good, thanks.
indicator of which vineyards are gonna give me the best kinds of, you know, the best tanks of wine. So essentially for this Meritage, I will take, you know, we can have up to, at Osprey, on red, we can have it 10 or 12 different, well, let's say 7 or 8 different tanks of wine. And I'll keep those all separate. And then I will go through and evaluate the quality of the wine. And then at the end of all that, I will be able to, you know, I put them all together. And then I'm sitting pretty much like a chef would come up with a new recipe. Would be, you'd have all the ingredients on your table,
Sure.
and you'd say, gosh, I wonder if I put a little lemon rind in
Yeah.
that sauce,
Yeah,
what that
exactly.
would do. Or how about if I took a little truffle oil and
Yeah.
put that in there, and then you come up, but if you have an idea where you're going, to get started.
Get started, okay.
But then the end result is often a trial and error that can take many days, actually. And also, I will sleep on some stuff and really, you know, it's really, you have to imagine, where is that wine going to be 3 years from now when I'm selling it?
Yes.
Especially for one of these reds. So you have to kind of have a, you know, you kind of are just, sometimes you're just feeling around and saying, gosh, I need to, if I put another, but I mean, on the other side, you could get too uptight, shall we say, about it and be, you know, should I put another little pinch? Another, I mean, if you get to that point, you know,
Yeah,
you
it's
need to
over.
have your head examined
Yeah.
because you're really, I mean, it's like the Bosch pear or the Anjou pear, you know what? And so certain blends just light up a bell in my head and I just say, ding, that's, you know, that is really where I want to be. And I can't explain how I know.
It's just a gift.
It's
Yeah.
just, it's not a gift.
I think
It's
it
just-
is.
That's practice. It's, you know.
It's
But
like
still, like, some
something.
people probably would do it forever
Yeah.
and.
It's
not be able-
it's an expression. It's just like being a musician or any other kind of artist. You know, to give you a different perspective on
Can I
blending.
just
Oh, sure,
interrupt
right.
for
Yeah.
just a sec?
Yeah, yeah.
And I will just to follow up on that, is you could give 5 different winemakers the same grapes from the same vineyard, and they would make 5 different wines.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I was just going to say something similar. I have my own wines that I make. I have my own label through BATF. It's called Tom Schaudel Selections Reserve. And I make 3 wines with Charles Massouded at Panama Vineyards. And every, year I go out there and we go down into the cellar. And it's like he says, it's, you have these different runs of juice. And so it's all right, I want to make a reserve Cab, a reserve Merlot, and a reserve Chard. So what I do is they have test tubes that are marked, beakers that are marked with milliliters. And you make different, that's how it's done. It's done on a technical level and you write down that formula. It's almost like a recipe. The thing that allows me to do what I want is I'm a chef. I deal with flavor. That's all I care about. I mean, he's in a tougher position. He's got to make a wine that's going to have general acceptability and it's got to sell and there's an economic end to what he's thinking about. I don't have an economic end. This is a vanity thing for me, so I just go for flavor. So I made this wine, the first reserve wines 2 years ago. And we had the East End Food and Wine Awards, which was a one-year wonder, and then it flashed and burned because they couldn't pull it.
The Slow Food Awards? Or
No, this was the East End, this is 2 years ago.
Slow Food, wasn't that a one-year deal?
That might have been a one-year deal, but the Food and Wine Awards was funny because they had, judges, and they picked the best restaurants, they picked the best wines, the whole thing. So all the wines was sent into the American Sommelier Society in the city to be judged on a blind. So it turns out my Chardonnay wins best on Long Island. Now I'm friends with almost every winemaker on the island. And so when they picked it, I'm like, wow, it's really because I'm not restricted by any kind of, thing other than flavor. So, and of course, I became an insufferable ass for 3 hours. It's like, hey, Roman, if you need any tips on Chardonnay, let me know. He's like, his fingers in his eyes, he said, at least mine's available, he goes. It was great. But yeah, I think it really comes down to flavor. Yes?
She's asking for the
Chinese,
Oh, yeah, that was cool.
Yes.
sometimes you call for cognac or Johnny Walker. In fact, there's a sauce called XO sauce.
XO, I know XO, yeah.
I wonder if you do anything like that.
Well, I had an Asian restaurant for a couple of years. And I don't pretend to be a Chinese cook or a Japanese cook. So what I did was I took Asian flavors and applied them to contemporary American food. And so when I had the restaurant, the tagline was Asian-inspired contemporary food. It wasn't an Asian restaurant. But I do love to play with those flavors. At Tom Tom, I do that a lot. And as far as wines go, with some of the stuff, all the aromatic whites, the Alsatian wines, the Gewürztraminer, the Marsans, the Roussins, the Rieslings, they all pair very well with Chinese food. Very well.
What I mean is you actually use them in cooking.
I do.
Use those wines.
I do use those wines in cooking, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
I mean, not the cooking wine, but the real good wine in cooking.
I don't use the real good wine in cooking because I do have to make a profit at some point, But if I'm home, I'll generally use the same wine with the meal in the dish. If I'm at the restaurant, I have to behave myself a little bit because, it becomes too prohibitive cost-wise,
If he wants a good wine from himself, he's not gonna.
Yeah, well, totally,
It wouldn't get into the pot. It would get in.
Right, exactly.
What I mean is the Chinese don't use XO cognac in the cooking.
Do they really? Oh, I'm so proud of them. That's great. Yes.
I have a question. Do you have any kind of rule of thumb, like when you're cooking and you use either a white wine or red wine as to what wine you put on the table?
Yeah, I mean, generally, if you're home, I would use the same wine on the table that I'm using in the dish. Again, you know, if you have a big cellar, you may not want to do that. You know, if it's just the kind of a casual thing, then it's fine. But it just makes sense to use the wine in the dish that you're going to serve with it. Yes?
You mentioned that in your private label, you wanted to do reserve wine. So what does that mean, reserve? Like, what determines it to be called reserve versus just a Merlot?
Well,
That's a good question, and that actually leads into this next wine that we're tasting. This is actually where we call this a reserve Cabernet Sauvignon. And for Osprey and for myself personally, reserve is one of those wines that you, at least out here, you may not make every year because you just don't get reserve quality grapes out of the vineyard. And so reserve it's something that when it comes along, you know.
if I could just interrupt for 1 second. If we would try the cheeses in counterclockwise order, you're going to go from mildest to strongest. Counterclockwise order.
Which is which?
Wait a minute, though.
The one in front of you?
You go light to dark?
No, take the, you know, the larger one is facing you, that's the mildest.
Okay, right.
That's the Berganost.
And go counterclockwise?
Then go counterclockwise, then you're going to come to the Casa Solo and then the Cave Age Cardona.
Thank you.
And then getting back to the reserve question, reserve, we will do different things in the vineyard. We will maybe
That's a mild.
Right.
It's
There you
the
go.
mild one.
on the vine
This is
where
mild.
we'll actually
There you go.
sit
But I still know which one.
through and actually cut off green fruit before it turns red or before it softens for Chardonnay, and we'll cut that fruit, and maybe we'll only have 2/3
God, you don't play
as
golf.
much or half as much
I do
fruit
play golf.
as we would have for a non-reserve.
You stand on the wrong side of the ball, though.
Where you going to get the grapes from? It's called reserve?
We will try to make, there is a trade-off for ripeness between crop size and the amount of heat you get in a year. So let's say, and then there's also, actually Eric Fry is the best. There's a certain amount of flavor per acre that you get. I love that. That's just a great way to describe it. And so what you do is when you chop off the developing fruit, you make that flavor go into what's left. So you get more flavor into what's left, and then you'll also get riper grapes with riper tannins, which will be fuller bodied, more concentrated. And so for us at Osprey, that'll really start in the vineyard, and then I will take it into the winery. I may do some different winemaking techniques on the wines that I think will be from the vineyards, where we're trying, to hit the home run and make something that's truly world class. But we spend probably twice as much making the reserve wine as we do making our regular wine, but for a lot of wineries, it can be just a marketing term, where they put more oak on the wine and they call it reserve, or they, but I'm a true believer in flavor, and I think after tasting Tom's food here, I definitely see that he's a kindred spirit.
Oh, yeah.
And, I can tell you that last year, I had labels for a reserve Chardonnay. I had nice wine in very nice, expensive French oak barrels. And when it came time to make the blend, because when I make a reserve Chardonnay, I actually will, at the end of the whole process of reducing fruit and using special barrels, I will select the barrels and put together a blend from the barrels of Chardonnay that I have with the top barrels.
Wow.
So I got to that point last year, and I had labels already in the winery, and I had bottles, And I got to that point and I said, you know what? This just isn't reserve. I wouldn't feel, it's not right to do that. I could force it and we could make a wine and you know what? We'd probably sell it. But to me, we just didn't have the flavor and I didn't want to, I wanted to make sure the quality was continually up here and not go roller coaster, where people would say, gee, I really like the last vintage, but now we're on this new vintage and it's okay, but it's not the way the last vintage was.
So it's
know
up
what I
to
mean?
you basically to determine.
Fortunately, I have ownership that really leaves it up to me, but a lot of times in a lot of big winery situations, and I've been there, the marketing department can largely drive
flavor
that,
it as a
and
reserve.
where they're like, we're out of reserve. We need something for the market, and we need something,
Okay.
we need something right now. So,
Let's see.
You would be a good drinking buddy for me.
I mean, you have two legs. You have an Osprey, you have Richmond.
I'm a pro. I do it for a living.
Hill and Richmond Creek.
which is actually an inlet to the Peconic Bay that's right across the street from us.
What's the difference? I mean, we've been to your
Yeah, that's a
tasted
good
the wines.
question. Richmond Creek, well, first of all, one of the main, the question was, we have a second label, which we don't sell under the Osprey name. We call it Richmond Creek. And it's not an uncommon practice among wineries. But essentially, those wines are they're designed to be a little bit simpler, a little bit for folks who are just getting acquainted with wine, who maybe aren't ready for some of the heavier reds, like these last two wines that we made, that would be a little bit beyond where they're at. Beginners.
Well, we've tasted some of your
Rookies.
Richmond Creek wines, and some of them are very, very
They're
good.
nice. They're nice,
Very
approachable,
good.
everyday wines, and that's really at a fair price.
Yes,
That's really
very much so.
That's really what they are. These two wines are the world class. We're going for broke. We want to stand up with the big boys. And unfortunately, because it costs us more money to make them, we have to charge big boy prices.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
So this last wine is Long Island Cabernet Sauvignon
This is
from the 2000 vintage. An exceptional year for Cabernet. The last year that we made reserve Cabernet at Osprey was 1995. And I can tell you, from 01 to 03, we didn't get there
Really?
for reserve
This is
cab, so there's no more of this on the market. I mean, it's available.
Can you
at
give him
our
5? Yeah. Can you give him
but
5
we
minutes
don't
on
have
cheese?
anything to follow this up in terms of the next vintage or the vintage thereafter.
But we can buy it.
Yes,
But we can buy it. It is available.
it's
in that
available
respect.
only at our tasting room.
Well, we better
So-
get our butts out.
And
I
it's
only
a,
live a mile from you.
I'd like to introduce you to Al from the Lucas Group, the Cheese Man.
Cheese guy, I hope there's some left.
Oh,
Before Al says anything about the cheeses, I want to ask you a question. It's kind of important to me because we agonized over this for about an hour the other day. How many like the first cheese with the wine?
Oh, there.
Okay. And the second cheese with the wine?
which wine? Because we have a port too.
No, the red one. We just drinking the red. And how about the third?
Third one was very heavy.
Okay.
I just lost my third.
Give him another third. Here. Here's a third.
no, see, I thought that was too messy.
I liked all of them with the wine.
The third's in front of you. That's it, yeah.
These two were
I'm just going to give you my quick thoughts, from a chef's perspective, because we're supposed to be talking about the mind of a chef when he's, not in the 60s. I thought that the first cheese tastes better without the wine. I thought it was milder, and I liked it better without. I kind of thought the second one was a Mexican standoff. They were kind of like pulling and yanking at each other a little bit. And I thought the third combination, the Cave Aged Cardona and the Cabernet Sauvignon was the best. I thought that the nuttiness played off the wine or whatever, and I like that one a lot.
Now, the third one was the
And I'm always right, because I'm the chef.
Go
It's the
cheese.
cave aged
You
Cardona.
have a more sophisticated taste than us.
Well, but everybody has the same equipment. I mean, yeah, but it doesn't really matter. It's like, because I play guitar doesn't mean that, that if you don't like blues,
I'm not
it's...
sure, so give us more cheese, give us more wine, and we'll have
There you go. That's a good restaurant custom.
with you, I've had Stilson with port
Right.
before, and it just
You're about to have it again.
Are we?
Yeah.
It just seems like the stronger cheeses go better with the fuller bodied stuff.
They do.
Okay? You know, that I agree with you that the first cheese, the creamy cheese, to me, I would probably have the white one.
Or by itself, yeah.
Or by
itself, yeah.
But yes, the last one, I agree. I think it goes much better with
I do too. I think that there's enough moxie in that cheese, you know, to kind of, you know, to wrestle with the wine and make it something happen in there, I thought, you know. Anyway, I'd like Al to talk about 5 minutes about the cheeses for you.
Thanks for all coming. I hope you enjoyed, and like I said, I hope there's a little left. Cheese. What do we know about cheese? Give you some tidbits. The traditional cheese plate is that. As far as in restaurants, as far as a course, at the bar maybe with a bottle of wine and some charcuterie. It seems to be a trend that has been in Europe for on and on and on, and is now made a play to come into the States. I think maybe you've seen it at good restaurants, an alternative to dessert maybe. So what I do is I'm a purveyor in the tri-state area, and I go out to strictly domestic cheeses we're eating tonight. I think we should all be impressed that these are all made in the United States. They're truly farm-fed.
Can I help you too?
Just, you can take them and serve them. Just pass me before you go and I'll put the fruit on.
RBST, if we're not familiar, you all know what RBST is? It's a hormone that you can give to a cow that makes the liver of the cow overproduce.
It's Carica.
Oh, that's what I was
In
saying.
that process, they get hoof infections on their feet, and then you get antibiotics. So that's the last
Yes.
15 years.
As soon as they get the fruit, they can go.
Process. Even things from Europe, you're not always necessarily getting the finest cheeses that come out of Europe. So we take great pleasure in doing this, finding
Thank you.
truly artisanal makers in the United States.
Jeff, can you pass me one more?
And bring, very privileged. to bring
job
their
Yeah, right. There you go.
Particularly making.
Good for you.
and your better gourmet stores. A tidbit is most of the cheeses here, the Camembert, I'm sorry about, but that should be at Fairway in the next 2 weeks. If you read yesterday's Times, the same cheese company, the Rin French Cheeses, Triple Brie, was written up in Florence Fabricant's column about winning the world gold in the world cheese competition, which means you were up against pasteurized and unpasteurized cheeses from around the world. So that's a true testament of where American cheesemakers have gone.
Yeah, Tom, I actually survived almost 2 months at Tavern on the Green.
Did you really? Oh, wow. That must have been nuts. I'll bet, yeah.
Tonight are available in the Fairway. Better Eli's City. I'm sorry.
Where is Fairway?
There's one in Plainview. There's one on 74th and Broadway. There's one on West End.
Gotta go to Plainview.
Sorry, you have to go where there's openness to it. There's a big paradigm shift that's going on out there. Like Adam will attest to that. Cheese, where wine is today with homogenization and let's do micro-oxygenation. If we need oak, let's throw some chips in a barrel. There's a lot of chemistry and things, techniques that are going on out there that are truly not what real fine winemakers adhere to in the past. So there's way to speed up processes and things like that. In the cheese world, each truly take on a life of their own. There are no two exactly the same, but I try and stick between 0 and 5 so guys like Tom don't call me up and say, this one is a 0, this one's a 10, and there's such a varying degree. So sometimes you have to have those discussions with the dairies to kind of keep them in tune to processes and whatever else. So, questions, thoughts, issues? Yes, please.
You mentioned at the beginning that cheese is now being served as a first course. I always thought of it as a dessert course. So how could you have, like, it's like having ice cream before you go into the meal?
Well, that's again a paradigm shift. Couple of 4 waiting for a table. They order a bottle of wine. The captain sees that. They seat them. The captain tells the waiter, why don't you bring up the cheese plate and just present it to them? That's one opportunity. Kind of gets the meal going. or as a standalone, as a food item at just the bar with some charcuterie with it. So there's two venues that it could happen. I don't necessarily agree it should happen between appetizer and the entree, but as an alternative to dessert, or as an accompaniment to dessert, or as a bottle of wine, something different. I
Would you have
find
the same, will it be the same cheese you would serve before as you would after, or it's different cheeses?
it could be, it's up to either the cheese steward, it's up to the chef, just like with the wines and how Tom approaches food, it's up to their flair. their
Could I
activity.
interject
Sure,
for 1
go ahead.
second? To your point, when I opened Cool Fish, I had a cheese plate on the menu for dessert. And we'd sell them occasionally, 5 a week or whatever. I took it off and I put one cheese on with biscotti and like some kind of compote with an after-dinner wine paired to that cheese. Sold 5 times the amount that I did with the cheese plate. I took a cheese plate, put it on as an appetizer, first course, and I sell 10 times the amount of that I did at dessert. So I'm with you. I mean, I would rather have it after, but it seems like the rest of them don't. So, you go with what works, and
I think a lot of people are, when you go to a dinner party, a lot of people do put cheese out, at your dinner party, brie or, something.
I especially like the one where you have to do this. It's fabulous.
You have to do it like this time.
On the Bisco cracker.
Oh,
It's really
does it get any better than that?
Anyway, so I think people are maybe accustomed because if they go to a dinner party, they have a little cheese maybe at the cocktail hour before they sit down.
To supplement what they're both saying is, I try and break ground. And what I mean by that is change people's attitudes towards cheese and how it should be presented. And some of the things in the banquet world, let's say as an alternative at a wedding or a bat mitzvah, etc. A cheese plate as a first course with a tall salad in the middle, something different. Or cheese stations or artisanal cheeses as a station during a cocktail hour as a convenient affair. And believe it or not, everybody knows cheese goes well with wine and drink, etc. But a lot of people would never approach doing that until, I guess, the last 2 or 3 years. Any other questions?
Has anybody been to artisanal?
For everybody, all three of you, because what's your opinion of what would be the consensus about cheese with champagne and possibly fruit?
One of my favorite combinations is, and getting back to what Adam was saying before, that yeasty smell sometimes in wine. To me, I associate it with toasted bread because I do some baking, and that yeast there's a certain, that's why I like Bollinger as a middle of the road drinking champagne. That's my favorite sparkler because it has that bready, toasted, yeasty kind of thing. And the best combination of champagne and cheese I've ever had is a goat cheese, a real good high quality goat cheese like a Humboldt Fog or something like that, with a Bollinger champagne. That's up there with sex and pizza for me, It's like,
And I would also add to that.
well, pizza and sex, sorry. Well, you can have one cold, so it's like, opens up a lot of possibilities.
I would add to that actually that first cheese, if we had a sherry. Now, nice sherry, Amontillado, which has, I think, the sherries have fallen out of favor. But a nice sherry could have gone quite well with number 1 and number 2, whereas maybe they were overwhelmed by the red wine, where you'd want a more richer, fuller cheese to really match up with either the reserve cab or the port.
Right.
And also, if I may say, that first cheese, to switch gears, I've had a lot of success with ales. I think mustard's in there. I think maybe that oak might be in there, a subtle hint. So it's going quite well in that arena for me. Question? No questions. There it is.
Wait.
Could you just repeat the name of the fruit again and where we might find it?
Oh, Carica. Carica, C-A-R-I-C-A.
It was very good.
Yeah, Carica is an interesting, I doubt it. Fairway in Santiago, Chile, maybe. Carica it's shaped almost like, it looks like a Meyer lemon, but it's shaped a little more like a papaya. It's got that yellow outside, it's a very thin skin, and the seeds inside almost look like a Roma tomato. Are you throwing stuff at us here?
It just like.
Yeah.
It's got these little white seeds, but it's like held together with, you know how when you cut a Roma tomato down, you got that seed that kind of held in there, and you got to scrape it out with a spoon. It looks like that. And I describe the flavor as like a cross between mango and pear. It's just an odd thing. And it looks almost like a bell pepper. I've put them out on desserts, and then what the hell idiot? What kind of idiot would put a pepper on a dessert?
Do they have that in Spanish neighborhoods, do you think?
I've never seen it anyplace else. I import it through a company called Dairyland. But you can, there's a TAMAYA.CL. TAMAYA.CL is the website for them. And that'll give you a bunch of choices for farms in Chile. And then just link onto those farms and it'll get you to where you want to go.